Hi, I'm Ged Smith, and I'm a family therapist for Merseycare NHS Trust in Liverpool and in private practice in the Northwest and further afield as well. I've always been interested in therapy and psychological mindedness, as far as I can remember, really. But I worked as a social worker in a town called Cheshunt in Hertfordshire in about the late 80s. And while there, KCC were doing some work with us, offering us the chance to become involved in family therapy and systemic ideas, which I'd never heard of. So with Peter Lang and Martin Little visiting our social services department, I went along to what they were doing and became really interested, more than interested. That's what really sparked my interest. I'd always been interested in therapy, but that was my first introduction to family therapy and systemic ideas. And I just thought, wow, this makes so much sense. It seems so good. So that's the origin of it, really. I went on to do the first and second year training with KCC in Hertfordshire. They had satellite clinics all over the place in those days. This was the late 80s, early 90s. I did that training, first and second year, or what were they called? Foundation and intermediate years with KCC. And then a job came up in Liverpool, which is my hometown, with Bernardo's as a family therapist, not necessarily qualified, which I applied for and got, slightly to my surprise. And this meant making a major life decision with my wife and our two kids at the time, where we lived in London, to return to Liverpool. Wow, big decision. We did that. So I then moved into Bernardo's and worked there for the next 7 years as a family therapist with a small team. I began there unqualified, having just done the first 2 years at KCC. And during that 7 years, I qualified at IFT, the Institute in London. So I returned to London to continue the training and became qualified in 96. So 2 years at KCC, 2 years at IFT. But probably the greatest teaching I got at this time was being a full-time hands-on family therapist in the Bernardo's family therapy service in Liverpool, which was an amazing experience. We were, it was at this time really when to me anyway, and I think to many other people, the massive shift in family therapy theory took place, where we moved from the olden days of family therapy being a guru-led field full of charismatic figures who performed miracles on families from quite a first-order position, to the revolution in power and feminism and graces, although that acronym wasn't out then, I don't think, or it just come out. Working in a much more collaborative way. So that revolution happened while I was in Liverpool, and I really took to it, and it was a much better way of practicing for me. So that's where it led from Hertfordshire to Liverpool. One of the great attractions to me was that it made so much sense on a basic level. The idea that problems are not located in people's heads, but they're more located in their lives or their contexts or their worlds. And it's a question of what's happened or happening to them rather than what's wrong with them. To me, it was not only such a sensible and common sense and helpful way of thinking, but it was also much more egalitarian and ethical. And I thought, this is the way I want to work. This is far more helpful to people. And so it was that particularly took hold of me. And also at this time, the narrative movement was taking shape and becoming very well known in Britain. So we had visits from David Epstein and Michael White, who both came to Liverpool. We met them, we worked with them alongside other people. We actually arranged for visits to our clinic. Our small clinic, we put on events with Tom Anderson and then with Harley and Anderson, which paid for themselves because people paid to come and see them, and that took care of the funding to get these people over and pay them. So we were getting influenced by some who, for me, were the most influential and positive and ethical practitioners in family therapy at the time. So the whole culture of what was going on then really influenced me. I was so excited by it and so impressed by it all. Exciting days. I suppose throughout all of this, the use of self has been massively important and of interest to me. I didn't call it that in the beginning, but I always thought of myself as being some northern working class Scouse lad with a certain culture and attitude, which somehow in the early days I was probably encouraged and probably thought I should find a way to leave that behind and not be like that. But with more experience and more confidence, I realized, no, actually, I can use this. I can bring it in. I shouldn't be ashamed of it. I shouldn't think that other ways of working are better. So I developed ways of reclaiming my own origins, I would say, and being more with people in an authentic way. And some of the people I met at the time, some of the famous people, I noticed weren't always like this. They were different in the room from how they were in person, in the bar later, or wherever. They were different. And I thought, wow, you are so different, sometimes nicer. And I thought, that's an interesting thing, you know. How should we match how we are elsewhere and how we are in the therapy room, which is an interesting question. And I came to believe then and now that ideally it's quite similar, or in fact the same. Obviously what we do, how we speak, how we position ourselves will be different. If you started doing that in the pub with mates, you wouldn't have many mates, but in terms of the other aspects that I'm talking about, Minuchin, for instance, very, very powerful, charismatic guru type figure. In person, he was a lovely, humble man. Outside of the therapy room, it surprised me. As I hinted earlier, I think it was the reading of people like the narrative school, also people like the reflecting team associates of Tom Anderson and others, the post-structuralist kind of movements, people like Tom Anderson, Harley Anderson, and the narrative school generally. All of those people who had ethics at the heart of their work, this really struck me as important and a far more productive and effective way to work with people, rather than being, well, it was that whole move that was happening for a lot of people in family therapy. It was the shift from first to second order practice, where we moved from doing therapy to people to instead being engaged with people. So it was all those papers, all those famous practitioners at the time that I've mentioned, and all of the other, so many other people associated with those types of models, which were really powerful. I think that was a massively helpful springboard to my practice. I think the biggest way it's changed over the years hasn't been particularly theoretical. I think it's been just through my own personal evolution of becoming more experienced and more confident and older. So I'm more prepared to take risks and to make challenges and to be clearer in dialogue, really. I'm quite well known among the people I work with as being a straight talker. Because too often I see people talking at great length about simple ideas, and I often feel, just say the thing you think. I know what you think, and just say it. And people so often don't. So I've probably worked out ways of being much clearer in my use of language. And I don't know where that's come from, because I don't see many people writing about that. But it amalgamates all of those ideas, being use of self, being authentic, being aware of graces in your own position. So I am a white British man, which has power, but I'm also other things. And being aware of those things. And so far, I think it's been okay. People don't object to it, this straight use of language. Usually more likely the opposite. People welcome clear language, clear communication. And I think that's been a massive shift in my work, but that's come with age and experience rather than anything theoretical. And I think it works well, and I think people appreciate it. And I've talked about this and written about this and presented several workshops on this kind of thing, language. So one of the papers I wrote, for instance, was called Cut the Crap, which talks about this. straight language, clear communication. It makes life much easier for me as a practitioner. And as I say, I think families appreciate it more. Obviously, you have to judge it. You can't just say anything. Obviously, that would be disastrous. But I think within certain parameters, for me, it works far better for the families I meet. Also, I think my doctoral research was on challenging hegemonic masculinity in the room. So challenging men who are exhibiting or showing or talking about traditional masculine values and finding ways to challenge that while also at the same time engaging with them. Because as we know, men come to family therapy less than women do. Men see childcare as more of a woman's issue than their issue, sadly. So when they do come, we don't want to frighten them off or challenge them so much that they don't come back. So finding ways to challenge toxic masculinity values, which may be shown in the room in ways that make men interested in their own behaviors or thoughts rather than just told off so they won't come back. So that was the topic of it. And that connects with some of the things I've talked about already to do with power, use of self, and me being a man doing that will have a different meaning for the men I do it with and the families I'm with than if it was a woman doing that. And that itself as a whole, several doctoral studies in that topic alone to do with the gender of the therapist, obviously, as we would all know. So everything I've talked about to do with language, use of self, masculinity, power is always intricately entwined in all of those issues. But I think also related to that, an exciting future prospect and current prospect is politics, both small p and big P, and how that impacts. Because really, systemic practice should be political, because people's lives are affected by politics. If you're suffering in a socio-economic way, or you're unemployed, or you're black, or you're disabled, then those things are political as well as personal. And that was completely neglected in the early days of family therapy. And I think it's becoming more thought about now, and that's important.